Ladies and gentlemen, I have on the show Chuck Rocha, who is author of Tío Bernie. Tío means in Spanish means uncle. The inside story of how Bernie Sanders brought Latinos into the political revolution. He's also former senior advisor to Bernie Sanders for president 2020 and 2016. And Chuck got a lot to say. Chuck, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, brother. Nice to be here.
Let's first talk about the progressive movement and what Bernie Sanders did to American politics. You were there front and center. Give us some background to that.
I think what Bernie did is he proved what was possible. He proved that an AOC could happen. He proved that a lot of these progressive Congress folks can happen. He proved what could happen when you have grassroots organizing and grassroots fundraising. He fundamentally, with the campaign and the team, and I give a shout out to all of the hardworking volunteers who were the backbone of that campaign, the real difference in what we see in American politics. Look, I am no youngster when it comes to campaigns. I've been doing this for 31 years. And money has always been the mother's milk of all campaigns, no matter what kind of campaign you get. And I tell people this every day. There's a lot of great people who want to run for office, but they never can raise enough money to go tell enough people what they stand for to get them to vote for them. Bernie Sanders created a grassroots fundraising model that changed politics. Folks will talk about the grassroots this and the door knocks, all that's important. But if he hadn't raised enough money to tell enough people who Bernie Sanders was in 2016, none of these other things would have ever happened.
Yeah, I say this often, man, to my college students. Messaging is free. Distributing the message costs money, no matter what you do. So I'm glad to hear you talk about that and put it in proper context, because Bernie Sanders, he got people invested. So while some of these other candidates during that era, they had a lot of money, Bernie Sanders really got smaller contributions from a lot of people who were simply believers in the campaign and believers in the movement. Let's talk about the Black and Brown coalition, specifically how the Bernie Sanders campaign really ignited that kind of coalition building inside of the Democratic Party.
Look, what we did inside the campaign in 2020 was learn from the mistakes, and I openly talk about this, that we had made in 2016, and started the campaign leaning into race and leaning into diversity. And what I like to talk about is the equity piece of diversity, and making sure that there was teams in the states that looked like the people that we wanted to talk to. In South Carolina, a state we did not win, it was 80% African American, 90% from South Carolina, led by a strong Black woman. Like, this is what we had heard the people talk about in 2016, and we lived our values in 2020 because we had more time to build that out. And with the Latino outreach operation, I was honored to sit at the helm of that as a senior director and making sure that that was implemented in the right way. But we had lots of Latinos on staff. We started talking, I write about this in the book, talking to people of color 6, 8, 9 months in advance. We had budget authority to make sure that there would be budget spent in these areas and in these communities early, and it never got cut. This is the formula for all Democrats to use, which is the whole reason I open sourced a book called Tío Bernie, to say if we can do this for Bernie Sanders, a white man, progressive from Vermont, think what we can do for Mrs. Jackson running for the Wisconsin Senate. Think what we can do for Mr. Hernandez running in city council in Austin. Think about folks who would actually be from our community, talking to our community. So I wanted to lay out the outline for everyone to be able to use.
Very well said, and a remarkable strategy, remarkable execution of that strategy as well. I don't have a lot of time, only got a couple of minutes, but I want to ask you about the voter restriction laws. You know that the Department of Justice recently announced a lawsuit against the state of Georgia. But truthfully, all of the Republican states, all of them, passed some level of voter restriction after Donald Trump lost the presidential election. What are your thoughts about voter restriction laws, and how do we strategize to overcome what the laws intend to do?
The electorate has changed since 31 years ago when I started running campaigns for Ann Richards back in the great state of Texas. The population has changed. Folks are multicultural, multi-generational households. The average school-age public school student in Texas is a person of color. So when you have less than 30% of your school children that are white, and you have 98% of all the elected Republican officials in Texas being white and predominantly white men, they see a demographic changing around them. And instead of trying to go speak to them and get them to vote for them, they are now trying to encourage them not to vote by making it more restrictive. And this is anti-democratic, and I think it will come back to bite them in these elections, because what I'm hearing in all of the focus groups is that people are ready for change and they want to make sure that their voice is heard in their government.
Don't you think on the strategy level, and I think you kind of hinted to it just then, that we can actually utilize this level of restriction and these egregious actions being done by statute and legislation to motivate the base to say, look at what they are trying to do to your vote. Utilize that as motivational capital to bring more masses out to participate, to not only protect their right, but protect the right of their children and their children's children.
But Dr. Richey, what we have to do with what we're doing with messaging, to your point about spending a little money, is go into those communities and talk about what this restriction means to them. A lot of times folks like me and you are trying to get it out here on the media, but you don't see the politicians sending a mail piece, a digital ad, or a phone call talking about what this restriction means to your grandmother who doesn't drive anymore, who had to give up her driver's license, who you have to take to the grocery store. How's she gonna be able to show her ID when she don't even really have an ID anymore other than an old social security card? What is the real impact? We need more politicians talking and paying communication into those communities to make sure they understand what's at risk, because there's a lot of good people going back to our elders who fought and died for this right, that we need to remind these young folks about why it is so important that we fight for this value every day.
You're telling Democrats put their money where their mouth is,
That's
because if you're saying that this is a fundamental destructive element of democracy, that means that a whole lot of your money needs to be spent on making sure this does not happen to this democracy. Brother, I appreciate you and thank you for all that you continue to do for the movement to right. And I mean righteousness when I say right. How can people check out your book?
Go to toburneybook.com or you can go to solidaritystrategies.com. Thank you, Dr. Richey.
Chuck, it's a pleasure, brother. Thank you.